Good afternoon and welcome to the first of our Exeter Tehran conversations on philosophy with myself, Sajjad Rizvi from the University of Exeter, and my colleague Mohsen Feyzbakhsh from the University of Tehran. We're going to have about six or seven of these conversations over the next couple of weeks or so. And I just thought it'd be useful to say a couple of things about why I thought we would have these conversations. The first is that both from the perspective of philosophy and from the perspective of the study of the Middle East and of Islam, increasingly I think there's quite a lot of interest in what philosophy is out there. Philosophy certainly in most of the world, in the non-West perhaps we could call it, and also the role philosophy plays within Muslim societies in the Middle East and in the wider region. So a lot of what we're going to be doing is trying to grapple with this question of what we mean by philosophy in these particular contexts. Now, within that, it's quite easy to gauge when one looks at journals, things like Kitab-e-Ma, which are published in Iran, and other outlets, the Instagram accounts, for example, of major publishers in Iran, that quite a lot is published on philosophy. There are a number of translations of classical philosophical texts, which are always coming out, even quite recent philosophical texts, as well as really quite a large number of monographs. So part of what we want to do is we want our interlocutors to help us make sense of that material. Why is this happening? What is the significance of it? And how is this notion of philosophy being understood in the Iranian context? And so within that, we will have a number of conversations on particular branches of philosophy. So we will start today's conversation on Islamic philosophy, then we'll be having conversations on the philosophy of religion, philosophy of science, continental philosophy, analytic philosophy, feminist philosophy. Now, of course, there are many other branches of philosophy we could be looking at. Aesthetics is an obvious one, ethics could be one as well, but there's only so much you can do. And so we are very much trying to focus on what is possible and to try and get a snapshot of what is going on. I hope actually in the future we can do other conversations which may look at philosophy in Turkey and other Muslim contexts as well, which would give us a sense of perhaps the comparative that would help us look at this whole question of philosophy in the contemporary world. Okay, that's probably me speaking far too long. Mohsen, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, it was quite enough. I just want to add some more, one more concrete point. That is, I personally saw that there are a body of literature on philosophy which is produced in Iran, which is quite large, and also in around the world, but there are little relation or little relationship between these kinds of scholarship or these body of literature, and I was wondering why this is the case. So I think these kinds of conversations may shed light on these kind of issues.
Okay, that's useful, and just to also mention. The recording of these conversations will go up on the Institute of Arab and Islamic Studies YouTube channel. So there will be a record, and if anyone wants to come back and watch it later, and hopefully more people will watch it later as well. And of course, do give us feedback on how you think these have gone. Okay, I don't want to take any more time, so let me quickly introduce our first guest, who is Professor Sayeh Meisami, who is a professor of philosophy at the University of Dayton. I've known of Sayeh for a number of years, since she was at Toronto. The interesting thing about Sayeh, and we'll ask her actually about this, is that she did her first PhD at Tehran University, and that was a dissertation on Quine, one of the classic kind of stars of modern analytic philosophy. And then she did a second PhD focused on Mullah Sadra at the University of Toronto. Mullah Sadra and I think it was the Mullah Sadra in
Kermani.
Yes, and that book came out fairly recently. But she also wrote a wonderful introduction to Mullah Sadra in the series Makers of the Modern Muslim World, Makers of the Muslim World by One World Publications, and it's really one of the best introductions to the thought of Mullah Sadra in English out there. I think that's probably enough to keep you level and on earth, but she is really one of the best people working on philosophy, Islamic philosophy around. So let's go over to Sayeh and begin, I guess, with this, this question of why did you start with analytic philosophy, and then how did you move on to the study of Islamic philosophy?
Well, let me first say hi to everybody. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me to this convocation. And thank you for your kind words, Sajjad. Over the long time, like 25 years or so of my academic career, I think I've been fascinated with how we know the world through language, capture our experiences through language, and finally, how we seek to change the world through language. So as early as my MA in English literature almost 25 years ago, I wrote my thesis on John Keats' use of paradoxes, paradoxical language. And so I think now in retrospect, I think that working on Quine was no exception. Although I was partly motivated by the popularity of analytic philosophy at the time, like many other students of philosophy, now that I think back in time, I can see that I was still pursuing my interest in language, hence the focus of my dissertation on Quine's philosophy of language and the way he connects epistemology to language formation. Well, as for my original shift to Islamic philosophy, right after I got my PhD from Tehran University on Quine, well, honestly speaking, the initial motivation was a little bit of a pragmatic one due to my plan to move out of Iran to North America and pursue an academic career outside of Iran. Well, I thought I could contribute more easily and perhaps more meaningfully in North America in the field of Islamic philosophy due to my positionality and my linguistic skills in Farsi and Arabic. But regardless of this pragmatic factor, I think I still found my way back to my original engagement with language. And that's why my dissertation on Mullah Sadra and Kermani looked at their works from the point of view of discourse analysis, of concept formation, and again, how language within social power structures can contribute to do things in the world. And yeah, over the past few years, especially after my tenure, I think I've been more consciously going back to my interest in language and possibility of knowing the world through language and creating things, including different genres like poetic philosophy, which is my current fascination. And yeah, I think that's all I can say about kind of thread that may connect the different facets of my academic career.
I mean, I think what's really good, I think, with what you've done is that you've got a job in the philosophy department.
Yes, absolutely.
And most of us, well, I define myself as an intellectual historian anyway. And I've never been in the philosophy department. I've always either been in religious studies or in area studies. And I think one of the interesting developments in the study of Islamic philosophy in North America and Europe is precisely this increasing shift to people actually working within philosophy. And in many ways, I think your background and your training make you rather well placed to do precisely that.
Yeah, I pretty much feel at home. I get to teach both Western philosophy and Islamic philosophy. Currently, I designed the course title, and I've titled it Metaphysics in Context. And I'm going over a bunch of these people from Western and Islamic fields, including Quine, actually, within a comparative framework. So I haven't taught the course yet, it's for winter. But yes, this opportunity, I really appreciate this opportunity to be able to connect different, my different interests, yes.
Mohsen, is there anything you wanted to ask about that before we kind of get into the definitions?
Yeah, let me move forward. I will ask.
Okay. I guess the most obvious first question we should ask is what do we mean by Islamic philosophy? And in particular, is there a sense of what that means in an Iranian context, which perhaps might be somewhat different to, say, a British or an American or another context? You know, what do you mean by Islamic philosophy, and what do people understand by, I guess, Falsafe Islami or Hikmat Islami in Iranian context?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting question, and a tricky one generally when you talk about this, the naming of this huge body of centuries of philosophical production, all labeled as Islamic philosophy, or there are other titles like, and all suggestions, we are aware that all the options so far have had their own issues, like Islamic philosophy, Arabic philosophy, philosophy in the Muslim world, and so forth. Well, of course, I prefer the latter, philosophy in the Muslim world, among these choices, but that is not also without challenges, especially that not every sentence structure can accommodate it without sounding weird. So since the context of this discussion, your question is Iran, I will simply focus on the term Islamic philosophy, since that is the most common term, Falsafe Islami, Hikmat Islami, mainly Falsafe Islami, used in both Iranian academia and seminary. So the issue with this term in the Iranian context particularly is, I believe, far beyond the appropriateness, its appropriateness regarding the religious affiliation of philosophers, or the fact that they are, for the most part, not dedicated to enforcing correspondence between their philosophical views and religious beliefs. You know, this issue that has been discussed in a lot of texts. And on the other hand, some Islamic philosophers may not have any religious commitment at all. So this is not the main concern from my point of view. I think the major concern with the usage of this term Islamic philosophy in the Iranian context is its practical implications due to its political baggage. What I mean by that is the association of anything, I mean, after the Islamic Revolution, there is, well, anything that is carrying the adjective Islamic with it, labeled Islamic, is kind of being associated with let's say the post-revolutionary political order in the collective psychology of people and academics. So this is also reinforced by the fact that many political figures, starting with the founding figure of the revolution, Ayatollah Khomeini, had background in Islamic philosophy, especially Mullah Sadra, and played certain roles in adding it to seminary advanced curriculums of study as well. So I believe due to this political baggage, the term Islamic philosophy can be pretty misleading in Iran and has some unwanted implications, practical implications, because some of the major exponents of academic Islamic philosophy do not have any sort of alliance with the state, though that when you call them Islamic philosophers, it's like you're assuming their affiliation with the state. And more importantly, the endeavors, all the endeavors in the field of this type of philosophy that they call Islamic philosophy, even before the Islamic Revolution. And think of people like Sayyid Jalaluddin Ashtiani or Sayyid Hossein Nasr, and the important work that was done in the Royal or Imperial Academy of Philosophy that was in the 60s and 70s, funded by Pahlavi Queen. And this association is also misleading for the, let's say, the more common audience, because it contradicts the appreciation of, I mean, to the political association. That's what I'm still talking about. It's misleading because a lot of Iranians appreciate the intellectual treasures of the Persianate world, like Farabi, Razi, Avicenna, Tusi, regardless of any political associations. Any political suggestion that by this term. So I believe that the use of the term and changing it into this generic term covering a variety of traditions and a variety of trends and a variety of philosophers and type of thinkers of different backgrounds, this is problematic. So nevertheless, it is also possible to analyze certain discourses in Islamic philosophy in Iran, especially Sadrian philosophy, to show the influence, discursive influence of certain their influence actually on post-revolutionary ideological narratives, as I myself tried to show in my 2018 book, Knowledge and Power in the Philosophies of Kermani and Mullah Sadra. But this is not the whole story. And first of all, Mullah Sadra is not the only Islamic philosopher from Iran. And secondly, even with regard to Mullah Sadra, there are different facets and aspects to his philosophy that can be explored. And it is kind of unfair to bring all Islamic philosophy in general, and let's say in particularly Mullah Sadra, simply under the umbrella of a kind of state-funded discipline. That's why I think we might want to do something about using the adjective Islamic. And in the end, I would like to note that from my point of view, the emphasis on the adjective Islamic has also served to overshadow the unique Persian influence on the development of metaphysics in the Persianate world. And by Persian influence, I'm referring to the impact of mythological narratives about the nature of reality rooted in Zoroastrianism. And this is part of my future project that I hope to expound. And it's part of a project of connecting mythos to logos in the Persianate intellectual discourses that I'm looking at. And it's part and parcel of my overall interest in language and analysis of use of language in intellectual traditions.
I think that would be a fascinating study.
Thank you.
I mean, I think you've kind of pinpointed one of the issues, which is that in effect, Islamic philosophy seems to be very much Mullah Sadra, and perhaps Mullah Sadra's tradition, later tradition. So I guess you would include people like Sabzawari in it, and defenders of Sadra like the late Sajjad Rizvi, Nashtiani, and people like that. And that raises a very interesting question, which is what's happening basically championing the philosophy, or is it actually a critical engagement with? Certainly my experience is that there are not very many, I haven't come across very many works which really critically engage with Mullah Sadra. A lot of it is kind of exegetical. Some of it is very good exegesis, a very good way of reformulating the philosophical argument, sometimes even improving on the philosophical arguments using analytic language. But is it really trying to produce something new, or is it really just exegesis?
Yeah, you're still looking at the works in the Iranian context or overseas as well? All
I'm
kinds of.
I'm focusing very much in the Iranian context. Yes.
Okay. Okay. Well, I think the only, probably the only major critical challenge toward Mullah Sadra recently, when I say recently, means probably past 15 years, even past 15, 20 years, has been from a quarter that may not be appreciated as philosophical per se, like the Mazhab of the Tafkik school, challenging Mullah Sadra from a theological point of view that I may talk about later if there's time. But generally, I think the issue with engaging with Mullah Sadra and presenting Mullah Sadra, especially to the West, not just in the Iranian context, has been over the years, has been to emphasize more than enough, like emphasize the mystical side of Mullah Sadra and glorifying him. Well, of course, even despite years of activities and institutions that are funded by the state to put Mullah Sadra on a pedestal as the philosopher par excellence, as the philosopher, um, his position on the authenticity of existence is not the only position advocated by all Iranian philosophers alike. And I remember from my years of studies at Tehran University that there were philosophers working in the field of Islamic philosophy who did not agree with the doctrine of the authenticity of existence. And they were still followers of not just the Avicennan simple dualism of quiddity and existence, but even somehow tending toward people like Mir Damad and the authenticity of quiddity. So underground, I mean, deep down, we could see that there is a debate, and I think it's very important for our scholars and the students to keep up this debate, especially the debate between quiddity and existence, because it is eye-opening. I mean, it can open new windows to more critical work instead of just glorification and reiteration. So, and also, it is important to give podiums and publication venues, provide publication venues for both sides rather than just one side. Just to keep the Socratic method alive. And also that would be to the benefit of Mullah Sadra, because I believe this would save Mullah Sadra his rightful place away from the political ideology of the state. And talking of Mullah Sadra, it is important to sustain different approaches to his philosophy, um, not just mystical, but also analytical. I think there are people among students and scholars who are working on Mullah Sadra, maybe as we speak, in their dissertations and all, from this point of view. But unfortunately, due to a gap between people who work in the analytic tradition in Iran and people who work in the supposedly Islamic tradition, has kind of blocked a fruitful conversation between these two traditions. And probably, and also the dominance of the mystical approach among Iranian scholars has also led to a reductionist judgment of Mullah Sadra by North American academics. Let's say, for example, today, in most departments of philosophy in North America, you're probably accepted as a kind of medieval philosopher if you are working on Farabi or Avicenna. But as soon as you say that I'm working on Mullah Sadra, it's like, okay, is Mullah Sadra philosophical enough? I think that I would put the blame partly on the kind of representation of Mullah Sadra by the Iranian scholars, not only in Iran, but in the West. So it's a side effect that he's been, of the way that he's been presented to the world. So I believe the more discussion, the more debates between the two sides of analytic and non-analytic philosophers in Iran should, would help probably resolve this issue. And I also now that I have this podium, let me say this, that no matter what our philosophical tendencies are, I hope as Iranians we can appreciate the richness of our intellectual history. And to be an analytic philosopher in Iran should not necessarily make you label our own intellectual history as backward or falling behind Western philosophy. And that's what I've heard from many people. And there is still some kind of that kind of conversation in the air, that why has Islamic philosophy fallen behind? It's not like that. I mean, we are dealing with different intellectual traditions, and I'm not sure the Western academia, in the Western academia, people also look at their intellectual past in this fashion. I mean, there are still professional work. There's still professional work being done on ancient and medieval traditions, and especially nowadays that the Eurocentric ideology of progress is being challenged more and more. So, yeah, I think the critical this critique of Mullah Sadra has been there for a long time, but it has been kind of overshadowed. Well, Mullah Sadr was criticized as early as his own time, like with people like Rajab Ali Tabrizi and a host of others who followed in that tradition. And there are comparative studies of Mullah Sadra and other Western philosophers, which has its own issues, actually, due to the methodological deficiencies. But
I was actually going to
I
come back.
think this, yes, but I think this is alive. I mean, this critical attitude. Iranians generally are critical people. And I don't think anybody or any regime or any kind of ideology will ever stop them from being critical. And I am a Mullah Sadra scholar, and I've also worked in analytic philosophy, and I don't see why I should prefer one over the other. I can put them into conversation, and I think that works out. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, we'll come back to this question of the comparative work.
Okay.
I mean, I have like a bunch over there as
All
well,
right.
and they are sort of vary in quality. But I think one of the points that you made is absolutely correct, which is that there is a certain association, and this goes back to people like, say, the Sen Nasser's work, where, you know, I've had conversations with, you know, people like Stephen Menn, etc., who, you know, sort of say, well, do you really work on rigorous philosophy? Is Mullah Sadr a rigorous philosopher?
Yeah.
And they sometimes assume that if there is any element of the non-propositional, then there somehow is no argument. And of course there are arguments, but there's more than just the Avicennian and tradition going on there.
Mm-hmm.
I want to bring Mohsen in because, and especially kind of start this conversation about, I'm familiar that at the Tehran University there is a separate philosophy department and a separate Islamic philosophy department. So I wonder if some of this is due to precisely that kind of division. Mohsen, can you?
Let me begin by this. I would like to go beyond the distinction between Mullah Sadra and other philosophers, other Islamic philosophers, which is very important in the Iranian context. But I'm wondering if this is the whole thing. I think the gap between the scholarship on the study of Islamic philosophy in Iran and the study of philosophy in Iran, whether analytic philosophy, conscious philosophy, etc., and the study of Islamic philosophy abroad is more than the distinction between Mullah Sadra and other philosophers. My impression is that there is a growing interest in working on other philosophers, especially medieval philosophers and post-Avicennian philosophy in Iran. And there have been many good works which is produced so far in the last decade or so. But I think there is still a problem with associating the scholarship on the Islamic philosophy in Iran, even those who are not dealing with Mullah Sadra in particular, with the scholarship on Islamic philosophy in abroad. specific, I think the secondary literature which is produced in Iran is quite neglected. I think you are one of the few persons I know, Sajjad. You are one of the few persons who pursue the secondary literature on Islamic philosophy in Iran. But I think it's by and large neglected, and I think this is something more than mere language barrier. It's like it seems that it is like some two kinds of scholarship, two traditions of scholarship, especially when we're talking about the traditional scholarship on Islamic philosophy. There has been some kinds of scholarship which is produced mostly in English by Iranian philosophers, which has tried to work on Islamic philosophy in terms of analytic philosophy by some junior scholars. But I'm wondering if this is the only way in which we can relate to two different traditions, and we can in a sense globalize the study of Islamic philosophy. How do you think about this, Sayeh?
Yeah, actually, the point you mentioned is a very important one about the neglect of secondary literature. I think part of the problem, I've thought about this myself, is the difference of rhetoric and methodology. By the difference of rhetoric, I mean the way that an Iranian approaches writing, not just thinking, but writing an essay, is kind of, in many cases, the Iranian, the Farsi literature do not follow the same, let's say, universal Anglo-American rules of essay writing, which is not necessarily a bad thing. I'm not saying that it's bad. They're just two different rhetorics. And most Western scholars who might even be familiar with Farsi, somehow reading fluency, it will be very hard for them to follow this type of rhetoric. Let's say, for example, as a native speaker of Farsi myself, I can easily figure out when I read just this whole book, for example, on this philosopher, and the way that connections are being made, not following the particular writing methodology in the Anglo-American tradition. But it should be very hard, I suppose, for non-native speakers to do that. And I don't know what is the solution. I don't want to encourage all people of the world to just emulate the way that Anglo-Americans write. That type of writing grew within a particular social and historical and scientific context, and it served particular purposes. I still like and appreciate the way, for example, an Iranian scholar integrates poetry in their philosophical work, or shift from between different genres in their works. But this is, this may not be very palatable to a non-native reader of secondary Farsi literature. So probably one way to do that is to introduce the way that we write. I mean, like to be more conscious of our writing methodology in philosophy, and be more methodologically conscious and talk about it and write about it. But
isn't this
there is no way, I don't think there's a way around it. I mean, like, we cannot just go ahead and encourage people out there to say, okay, you have to read Farsi literature. The translation is also a problem. I mean, like, a lot of good works that are written in Persian, they are not being translated into English. And again, because of that rhetorical gap in writing genre, when they are translated into English, sometimes, I mean, like, they may be hard to get the message across to the non-natives. And unfortunately, this is my experience of my first-hand experience with Western scholars and Western people generally. They don't have a lot of patience with things other than their own culture and language. I mean, which is, I don't know, it's kind of, we can call it a kind of superiority complex, whatever, but this is the way it is. I mean, they don't have much patience. So
yeah, reflected in the fact that, I mean, we had a few kind of recent online exchanges on this about, you know, for example, when people work on Ibn Rushd, why don't they read any of the Arabic scholarship on it? And some people said, well, it takes me too long to read it, or I haven't got the time and I can't make sense of it. I personally think those are really bad responses, because, you know, if you were reading, say, a German philosopher, strictly speaking, there should be absolutely no impediment for you to read secondary scholarship in German, right? So why should it be any different? But I think one of the points you make about style and rhetoric is that there is, I think, a distinction between, say, very traditional seminary style commentaries and some of the more academic literature. So, you know, for example, if we're talking again about Mullah Sadr, I found Sayyid Jalaluddin Ashtiani's work very useful over the time. I found Javad al-Amali's commentary in the Asfar very useful. But I would not necessarily recommend them if you want a student to get a very quick sense of what's going on, because you have to read a lot to get to the point often.
Quickness is the key in the West. Quickness. Everything has to be quick.
At the same time, of course, there are works which are more academic, and sometimes they are written even from people in the family. So, you know, I got this book a few years ago on sort of essence and existence by Fayyazi, called Hasti or PhD, and it's actually a wonderfully well organized work. You know, and it's extremely useful as well. At the same time, there are some people who are very famous, who you know and Mohsen knows, who are huge celebrities on TV, etc., and they are unreadable in the sense that they churn out books, and most of it is just nonsense. And of course, they're also very famous professors at Tehran University. And
tell me about it.
I fundamentally don't understand what is even being said. You know, I picked up this one book, which is supposed to be on Nasiruddin Tusi's philosophy, another one on Davani, and I can't make any sense of it. And I think I read Persian fairly well, but I cannot actually understand what is being said at all. And because there's hardly any reference to the text, I don't even know where these kind of interpretations are coming from. So I think there is this element, but can I maybe pursue this issue with both you and Mohsen about the difference of having two different departments at Tehran?
It was not the case when I was studying there. It was just the Department of Philosophy. But the thing was, which also helped me in pursuing later in Islamic philosophy at the field, that we had half of our credit, both in grad course, MA and PhD levels, at both levels, we had courses, half 50%, it's Islamic and Western.
No, I think it was. Sorry.
No, not at the time. It was there was just a philosophy department.
There is a philosophy department which is in the humanities department, humanities faculty.
Oh, you're talking about
Islamic
theology
philosophy.
school.
Yeah, in theology.
Yes,
Yeah,
I mean,
okay.
Philosophy and theology.
Okay. I had nothing to do with that school. I never went to the theology, so I don't know about that. But at the Tehran University, which was the philosophy department at the time, it was just philosophy. I don't know how it is now. I'm not really in touch with anybody out there, unfortunately.
Yeah,
but,
it's the philosophy department. It is still
okay.
philosophy
So
department, which is half
I was
Islamic philosophy and
surprised.
half Western philosophy.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, but yeah, as far as I remember, the other school was mainly known as theology, a theological school rather than philosophy. But and this said that to include Islamic philosophy, like, I don't know, under the umbrella of a theology school, that's self-explanatory. That what they suggested by that. But there were scholars of Islamic philosophy, like, for example, I had courses with Dr. Ghulam Hossein Dinani, and he's a very respectful and good professor and scholar, and he taught Islamic philosophy at Tehran University, along with others. So yeah, I was surprised to hear that they divided it, but that is not the case, as you say. Okay.
No, I didn't mean it was division.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Two different
philosophy department in arts, and then there's a philosophy department in Ilaniyat.
Okay.
And I remember a while ago having a conversation with someone in the philosophy department who was very dismissive, both of the ilahiyat, but also like he was saying to me, Mullah Sadr is not a philosopher. So
Okay.
and he was basically saying the only Islamic philosopher worth reading is Ibn Sina.
All right.
Which of course is a position I've seen come across in many other places as well. I remember having a conversation with a colleague at Kuwait University who was saying exactly the same thing, which is that the only philosopher in Arabic worth engaging with historically is Ibn Sina.
Well, I remember back then a grand intellectual in Iran once said in a speech that the only proper Islamic philosopher was Abu Bakr Razi, and not even Avicenna, and people got really mad at him. So people are entitled to their opinions. They have different views, but we have to that they think like that as individuals doesn't bother me, but when it is a symptom of an overall intellectual malady that is due to some external factors and conditions, including the political baggage of Mullah Sadra, that is bothering. Or just simple reductionism of Mullah Sadra just to a mystic, or like, you know, these are the roots of the problems that bother me. But well, individuals can glorify one philosopher, and like the Carnap called Heidegger's names. Well, but we have the right to look back and look at the context and analyze the context and see, look into what factors brought this about. That will be significant in revealing more truths about the social, the political, historical context. And I personally am really interested. I look at philosophy always within its social and historical context. So it's not something abstract. So these questions and these oppositions and these debates interest me.
So let me ask you one question before, in a sense, I come to this, what you're doing now, which is, in a sense, we've kind of come to this conclusion about how the scope and the possibility of this label Islamic philosophy is somewhat limited. So how do you think that's going to change? I mean, do you see any trends which might be different in Iran? In sort of more recent writing, which is coming out in Persian, is there an element of trying to go beyond exegesis, trying to go beyond kind of championing Mullah Sadra? Is there some sort of grappling with what we mean by this very notion of Islamic philosophy?
I think people, as I said before, people have already done that. I mean, there are good works being done. Like an example I could give you is like Abdul Rasul Ubudiyat has tried to approach Mullah Sadra in a different way, in an analytic way. Not, when I say analytic, not necessarily analytic in the sense of Anglo-American analytic philosophy, but in a more objective and analyzing way, like going through the propositions and looking at the meanings and the connections. Things have been done. The question is for probably those who fund the researches, and what type of research do they fund them in the universities, and what type of research finds its way in publications. Unfortunately, I think even a couple of publication venues that are abroad, that work from centers outside of Iran, also have certain predilections. It's not like they're open to all kinds of work. So I think the way to it is not to, we are not worried that there are not people out there who are working critically, or there are not critical minds. I'm sure there are a lot. We have very talented scholars and talented youth, especially And now that, and there is more possibility also for Iranians, students, not for everybody, of course, but for those who can, to go abroad and see different traditions and experience different methodologies, academic methodologies. So to change this, I'm not worried about the potential and what is actually being done by some people, but I hope for more opportunities and funding and more openness on the side of those who are nodes in the power, academic power structures in Iran. Like you mentioned earlier, that there are some famous professors who talk gibberish and some people who are not being heard while they do great works. Well, that is a symptom of a disease, and it shows, and it is due to the fact that, unfortunately, in Iran, to have a professorship, I mean, to have a position or to be a celebrity on TV, that doesn't show anything. That doesn't prove that you are doing great in what you're doing. And that actually, it's, at the same time, there are always people who are doing much greater work, but they're not given the podium or a publication venue.
Yeah. Mohsen, are there any particular trends that you can point to which are encouraging?
Yeah, it's the case. I think it's been changing now. It is still many founders that are still fond of Mullah Sadra, but there are some junior scholars who are working professionally on critical scholarship on Mullah Sadra or on other philosophers as well.
Yeah, I'm sure they are.
And yeah, I think I hope it will become better. But still, speaking of Fayyazi's work or Abdurrasul Ubudiyat's work, I think this more than being the problem is more than of style. It is maybe of the different ways they see their scholarship, they understand their scholarship. I think someone like Fayyazi or Ubudiyat, they are trying to do philosophy, do Islamic philosophy. They are trying to strengthen, for example, Mullah Sadra's arguments or criticize it, but they are not, to be strictly speaking, they are not intellectual historians. They are, in a sense, philosophers, Islamic philosophers, and this might be one of the reasons there is little exchange between these kinds of scholarship and the kinds of scholarship which can be labeled as intellectual history.
Yeah, but you don't need to be an intellectual historian to do philosophy, of course. And that's
maybe this is one of the problems that makes the exchange much harder than it seems at the first glance.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we can kind of talk about this a lot more, but let me just ask you this one last question, and if Mohsen has any last questions, because I want to leave a few minutes for others to ask questions. And that's what you indicated earlier, the work you're doing at the moment in terms of the connections between philosophy and literature in particular. So maybe you can say a bit more about your current research, and then we can wrap it up.
Well, actually, over the past few years, particularly after my tenure, with the stability that comes along with it, I've been trying to make a case for appreciating the different dimensions and possibilities of philosophical inquiry and the diversity of philosophical methods and genres. For example, in my last article that was published this year, summer 2020, I have tried to show that poetic methodology becomes essential to Mullah Sadra because of the type of philosophical task that he embarks on, because of the fuzziness of the concept of wujud, existence, that poetic methodology becomes essential. And my discussion of poetic philosophy is not also just confined to a type of text that is identified as poetry in contrast to prose, but Rather, the use of the term poetry, poetic, is extended to any narrative of reality for me that involves imagination and poetic techniques. So as well as a type of rhetoric that is not restrained by Aristotelian logic necessarily. So I explained the priority of, in my current, in my latest project, I explained the methodological priority of poetic thinking and writing for a particular type of philosophy, not for all types of philosophy, but for a particular type of philosophical genre whose primary object of inquiry is existence or being. So, and while my prime example here is Mullah Sadra Shirazi, I also briefly discuss Heidegger's method of poetic thinking regarding existence to support my thesis that the tool of philosophical inquiry and its object normally tend to match. So, and as a corollary, as I said before, I hope to make a case for appreciating diversity in methods. I'm really kind of fed up with this narrow-minded idea of that there is one way of doing philosophy, and this one way of doing philosophy has been determined by some time in history by people in the West, and there is one way of writing philosophy. So I thought maybe now that I have more time and opportunity after my tenure, I can look into this and write in this too. And this also will bridge my project to a future project that I think I briefly mentioned before, on how mythos and logos work together rather than against each other. Again, I consider this break between mythos and logos as a symptom of Eurocentrism. So as a future project, I would like to study the continuation of Zoroastrian mythology into the formative text of Islamic philosophy, particularly in the binary relation between being and quiddity, and I try to show that rather than being put behind by logos, mythos enriches and gives more creative dimensions to philosophy in the Persianate context. And I argue that the most pivotal conceptualization of reality, that is the binary interpretation of reality in terms of existence and essence, is partly shaped by or influenced by the Zoroastrian polarization of light and darkness. Well, this is, it's too soon to talk about this. It's a future project, but I believe I can show that this continuation between mythos and logos in the Persianate context was a catalyzing factor also behind centuries of later philosophical debates over which of the two polar concepts of existence or essence applies to realities as such, and the attempts to reduce one to the other. So these are, I think that's enough there's enough on my plate for the next couple of years with this. And I'm seeking funding for this last project. Yeah.
I mean, absolutely. One of the things which reminds me there is that in many ways, it's almost like you're going back to Iqbal and also to Corbin, because they were very big on this kind of these continuities between their context. And the other work, of course, which comes to mind is Michael Fisher's very interesting book, Blind Owls, which is about this continuity of narrative.
Yes.
In Iranian context.
Absolutely. Yes. I will bring into the picture all these different, but I hope to have offer a new methodology in approaching this topic.
Sounds wonderful. Mohsen, do you have a final question or anything?
No, let's leave some time for other participants to ask their questions. We have already run out of time.
I've got 3 in the chat, so let me start with my colleague at Habib University in Karachi, Noman Naqvi. So Noman, can you ask your question? Let me unmute you. Yeah, Noman.
Hi, thanks so much for that really very, very stimulating conversation. I learned so much, such extraordinary erudition across so many different traditions. I just wanted to ask, to add to that mix of themes that you've touched upon, about continental philosophy, because it seems that you know, that I learn about this from Sajjad, his posts often, that there seems to be quite a bit of translation of continental philosophy into Persian, and also that tradition, unlike the analytic tradition, is less restrictive in its protocols. So the engagement between continental philosophy and Persian philosophy, and this might be true of other, you know, philosophies that have been ethnicized, because it's not just Islamic philosophy, but all other non-Western traditions have been ethnicized in the modern period. So that was my question. Yeah.
Can you repeat the last part of your question? Excuse me. So what is that?
Oh, what I was saying was that, I mean, just continental philosophy, I think is a better conversational, this is just a, you know, hypothesis, but a better conversational partner than the analytic tradition, not just for Islamic philosophy, but other philosophies that have been ethnicized in the modern.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Actually, I totally agree with that. And I think the historical context of somehow contacts between the continental way of thinking and non-Western traditions, let's say, for example, the German, think of German idealism, all right? And the kind of places where ideas and even there are historical influences between German and non-German and just Persian or like non-Western philosophies. And in the case of Mullah Sadra, I think that the first thing that initiated a lot of comparison, let's say with Heidegger, was the emphasis on wujud, on existence. And it provided conversation among them. And partly, I think, it has some extra metaphilosophical, let's say, social factors again, as I'm interested in social factors of these sociology of knowledge formation. I think the type of demography of people in Iran, particularly, who work in continental philosophy, let's say people who work in Heidegger and people who work on Islamic philosophy, there is more similarity. I mean, it's like they see more eye to eye than between and just merely analytic and Islamic, but that's just a partial factor. But I suppose we can look at the roots of this in this history of contacts and the closer relationship, and probably partly going back to this question of rhetoric. Think of the rhetoric of like German idealism and the rhetoric of Iranian philosophy. There is more similarity in terms of, you know, the sophistication, the absence of this obsession with compartmentalizing ideas and just making it fit the essay writing rules. So I think that's probably a part of the deal there.
We have a question from Naveed Rashidian. Would you like to ask it, or I can repeat it here? Okay, well, let me just mention, his question is something which I guess we touched on earlier, which is how do you, how in a sense do you bring about this conversation between Islamic philosophy and the analytic tradition in a way which is not purely historical or exegetical?
I don't think we can prescribe any particular ways that we should bring them into conversation. I think I believe that in order to have genuine works, genuine intellectual works to come into being, there should be an organic conversation taking place based on some meaningful context. And as I said before, I think this is already happening. But when we say that we should bring, there's something that I wanted to mention and I think I forgot. When we say that we should bring Mullah Sadra into conversation with analytic philosophy, we have to be wary of a huge problem that is there and it has been haunting our students, particularly in Iran. And the idea, this unwittingly, of course, they tend to this unwittingly, unknowingly, tend to approach an Islamic philosopher, let's say Mullah Sadra, from an analytical point of view, not because they want to bring them into conversation, but because they want to somehow apologize for what they have, like to say that, okay, either saying that we said these things before, so we're good too. You know, it's rooted in like some kind of inferiority complex that has been unfortunately imposed on our people over the past 40 decades due to certain political issues and, you know, isolation of Iran or many other causes probably. But we have to avoid that. I mean, if two philosophical discourses are supposed to get into conversation, and there is an imaginative mind, and I really believe in the force of imagination behind all these. There's an imaginative mind who can bring them close and create some kind of conversation. I don't want to say comparison, but conversation. We have to be careful not to do it in unknowingly in a binary way, you know, like that, okay, we want to prove something, that Mullah Sadra is also a philosopher because he sounds like Quine, for example. I mean, I think this is not the way. So I can't prescribe ways how to do it, but I can say how we should not do it. And this is one of the ways that we shouldn't do it from this point of view of like our complex, this inferiority complex, unfortunately, that we want to find a place for our thinkers in the Western world because they are so great and we are backward. So I'm just...
I mean,
it is somehow...
Go ahead, Mohsen.
I just want to make a point. It is somehow like what I think Fred Beiser has termed anachronistic philosophy. Just
yeah.
I mean, it seems that there's two kinds of things here. One is this this insistence that someone like Mullah Sadra is a philosopher who's comparable to Kant or Hegel or whoever you have. I mean,
Whitehead,
the comparison with Kant and Hegel, as you know, has been done like Heidegger, almost done to death, right? But then there's this other element which, you know, philosophers don't tend to like it, but I remember speaking to a friend who actually is a philosopher in Beirut, Nader al-Bizri. So Nader, you know, we were having this conversation once, and he said, well, what if someone like Mullah Sadra is more than a philosopher? Right?
More than what? Sorry?
What if he's more than a philosopher? Because of course he has worked in many other areas. So
right.
if we're actually insisting on Mullah Sadra being a philosopher and nothing but a philosopher, we're actually diminishing him. Right? In many ways, because philosophy is privileged in a particular way as a category of knowledge in the modern academy, the whole idea of someone being, for example, a polymath or just being a thinker who wants to contribute in different areas it's uncomfortable. People don't know how to deal with it. You know, I can think of like modern people, like someone like Raymond Tallis. I mean, a lot of people don't know what to do with Raymond Tallis or Paul Feyerabend. I mean, these are people who have made serious contributions to philosophy, but their actual field of training is something completely different, right? And so in that way, I think it's this question of, is philosophy, on the one hand, it can perhaps be too large a category, and on the other hand, maybe it's too narrow a category of inquiry.
It's probably too vague. Like, it's in a sense that, what is philosophy? I mean, who is a philosopher? Who defines who is a philosopher? And we know that in today's Western academia, actually, anybody who teaches even one course in philosophy is sort of called a philosopher. I mean, so it has lost that glorious aura of the past that you're building a system, you are unraveling some puzzles in the universe. I think we're past that. I don't think it's a good thing, but we are past that point. And there is something good about doing philosophy in the non-Western world still that I think we should appreciate and keep it up. And that's the sort of passion. And it's still having that aura around it that is missing in Western academia. So I think we really, you know, as Iranians or any other non-Western scholars, we really have to look properly back at what we have and what we're doing, not in the sense of being apologetics, like trying to prove something to others, but prove something to ourselves. I mean, what, let's say, the idea that we have created such beautiful, creative texts that shows a lot about the way we look at the world, the way we look at ourselves, and there's a variety of them. And Mullah Sadr is not the only one, but Mullah Sadr is one of them. So yes, this whole view of we have to assimilate. I think that should go away. If unless that goes away, we will still be just wailing over, oh, why we're so backward. And most of us who especially do not get to go abroad and see the academia think great things are happening, like in departments of philosophy, people are just revealing truths every day, and just, that's not the case. That's really not the case. So
But I think that does have a lot to do with you know, how we privilege this category of philosophy, and how we privilege other kinds of categories in I guess sort of European, what you might call European academia. You know, I'm reminded of this. You know, Brian Van Norden's recently written this wonderful polemic on why people should read other philosophies, and at one point he says that, you know, he engages with a philosopher who says, well, you know, all these other traditions, they're not philosophy. They might be wisdom traditions, but they're not philosophy, right? And he says, well, how many departments of wisdom traditions are there in European and North American universities, right? So actually labeling something philosophy means that you have a space in that academic context, right?
Yes, it comes with some kind of credibility and authority. Yeah,
you don't have departments of mystical thought in Western academia. I mean, it's just not the case. So in many ways, it's part of it is making a claim for a space, you know, a space of some sort of engagement, right? It's not even an equality. I mean, we know it's not equality, because I think a lot of what's happening even in philosophy departments, yes, there's fundamentally this sudden interest in the non-West, but a lot of it's just token. You know that, you know, we all know that, that sometimes when people are hiring, yes, they want people to teach that, but you still need to teach the basic stuff, the basic metaphysics, the basic epistemology, etc. And when you're teaching those classes, they don't expect you to insert Avicenna or Mullah Sadr into that, or anyone else.
I do that.
Yeah, it's actually true, because that's not probably what they expect you to do. So I think, yes, it comes down to the whole politics of how we define some of these categories. And in that way, perhaps it's not that different from what happens in the Iranian context. The politics involved is slightly different, but there is still a political formation for how we define a certain discipline and a certain department. Are there any other questions? Sorry, I haven't been following the chat. Does anyone else have any questions? Last question.
I think Musa Mohammadian has a comment.
Yes, do you want to go ahead?
Sure, yes. Thank you, Sayeh, Sajjad, and Mohsen for the great conversation. So I have a comment about mostly like the pedagogical aspect of teaching Islamic philosophy. I mean, I'm a philosopher of science. I read philosophy in Iran for a very short period of time, like 2 years, master's, and then I came here for philosophy of science. And Mohsen actually mentioned that a lot of great books has been published in the past decade, and the past decade is the time that I haven't been here in Iran. So whatever I say goes back to my personal experience in Iran. So when I want to teach actually philosophy of science here, there are probably like 15 textbooks that I can read and pick some of them, or, you know, pick between them. But I remember when we were taught actually Islamic philosophy in Iran, it was like Bidayatul Hikmah, or it was like Manzuma, and like it begins with Mafhumuhu min araf al-ashya'i wa kunhuhu fi ghayat al-khafai, which is enough to blow your mind if you're an analytic philosopher by itself. So part of the problem actually, I think, is like this lack of any effort to make philosophy, I mean Islamic philosophy, accessible for teaching to philosophy of students, philosophy students. I don't mean accessible to like folks, like even like for students. For instance, I came here and then here I read about scientific methodology in Avicenna and thought experiments in Avicenna. And then I said, wow, there are so much resources in that, even for contemporary philosophy of science. So, and I mean, even our conversation kind of showed that, like, you know, it was about like Islamic philosophy, but like 90% of the talks was about like Mullah Sadra, which kind of reflects the passion that there is in Iran for Mullah Sadra, and like he's like, I mean, he was a huge character. There is no doubt for that. So
that might be partly my fault. That might be partly my fault. But anyway, go.
No, I don't think it is a problem. I mean, if we
It's
want
my
to actually
fault.
have
It's my fault because I'm a Mullah Sadra scholar.
No, I mean, no, it's no, I don't think it's a fault. I think it's a very good reflection of like the current status of Iranian scholarship about philosophy of science, or those who are actually interested in that. So when I was studying philosophy in Iran, when I was a student and I wanted to read Islamic philosophy, it was either Badaya or Mullah Sabzawari. And there wasn't any like previous philosophers. Avicenna, for instance, was not very like prominent to read. I mean, as a student, as a beginner of philosophy of science. Nor was Sohrawardi. So I think that unless something serious has like been done about this pedagogical gap for teaching Islamic philosophy to students in Iran, a lot of the great resources that already exist in Islamic philosophy would remain unexamined. And these are the resources that actually I believe can be used in order to bring the Islamic philosophy to a kind of conversation, in the sense that Sayeh mentioned it, not in the sense that, oh, we are sorry for our lack of 20th century analytic method, so let's try to fix it. No, in a like kind of real conversation that, you know, these are the resources that we can bring on the table. So that was just a comment that I wanted to mention.
And in fact, I think one of the things that you could say is that, sorry, oh, I completely lost that. On a completely different note, I wanted to mention this earlier. There is a wonderful article which came out about 2 years ago in a very obscure place, the Oxford Studies in Medieval Philosophy. Which I think is one of the best examples of serious analytic Islamic philosophy. And that's article, it's the article on the ontology of the human soul in Avicenna. It's by far one of the best pieces on Avicenna I've read for a very long time. And most people just are not aware of it because it's hidden away in a medieval philosophy journal. But it has a huge implication for anyone who works in Avicenna and who's interested in kind of mind-body problems and this whole question of the ontology and its relationship with epistemology and so forth. And it's written precisely in the sort of language which would be accessible to an analytic philosopher, or at least an analytic philosopher working on medieval. You know, it's in the journal which is edited by Robert Pasnow, who is probably, you know, the example of an excellent medievalist who happens to use analytic language.
The problem with textbooks, as Musa said, there is still problem. But speaking of the recent work which has been done, I think one of the works I could mention here is Reza Akbari's rewriting of Sharh Manzumeh, which is tried to be more accessible to those who are working in analytic philosophy in terms of modern logic, etc. I think that would be useful for a start, but it is still just Sharh Manzumeh. It's just about Mullah Sadra, and
it's what is it called? It's called Shari Manzumeh. What is it?
Yeah, it's called Sharh Manzumeh, I think, but it is he has tried to rearrange the arguments in terms of the mathematical logic.
Yeah, I actually think the Shari Manzumeh is a wonderful text. I think Bidayat al-Hikmah is a really bad text. But that's I have a kind of a love-hate relationship with Tabatabai, which is a bit different. But the Manzumeh, going back to my time as an MPhil student, I love the Manzumeh. We have one question, sorry, which I missed before, which was, I guess it's a very large question, but I'll give it to you, Sayeh, and see what. It's a large question because it says, can you throw some more light on the philosophical frameworks which are critical to Eurocentric paradigms? That's what it says.
Can you read the question again?
Can you throw some more light on philosophical frameworks critical to Eurocentric paradigms?
You mean like
well, maybe
this is too broad. Well, I'm in no position on I'm in no position to throwing light on anything. But
let me see if she's still here. Maybe she can ask the question.
Yes, could you elaborate a little bit?
Yeah, let me see if I can get
a little bit narrowing down would help.
She's muted. Khairunisa, could you ask the question or be more specific? I can't see. Oh, where is she? Yeah, there she is. Yeah. Do you, can you? Yeah, go ahead, please. Oh, do you want to just? You can type if you type it in the chat, then I can relay it. She's saying her connection's not very good.
In the meantime, I think Ali Mossadegh was also wanting to.
Oh yeah, Ali. Sorry, my colleague in Exeter. Yeah, Ali, go ahead. Oh, you're muted, Ali.
You're muted. Please enable your microphone.
Yeah. Unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, you can. We can.
Thank you very much for all your talks. It's very fascinating. One question I want to ask, in fact, two questions. What factors are common between the Zoroastrian philosopher and Islamic philosopher? The second question, if you want to introduce three top philosophers at the moment, the current one, who are they, if they want to give the name of them at the moment?
You mean current Iranian philosophers?
Yeah, that's what Persian speaking, Iranian philosopher.
Well, I'd rather skip your second question. I'm not naming names today for many reasons. But with your first question, first of all, I'm in the earliest stages of the project, but I'm not going to, my methodology is not that of showing actual historical influences. Like for example, say that, well, Avicenna read this and like copied this in his work that came from Zoroastrian back. This is not my method. What I'm trying to show is that when different narratives are in the air. Let's say, for example, Avicenna's working under Samanids, and this is during the Persian Renaissance. And there are different texts and Zoroastrian texts that we are aware people were well read in them, and they were being read. And apart from just academic education, but things, the way that Persian metaphysics of this duality took shape, that had far-reaching influences on Abrahamic religions and all that, which is not part of my project. But why not looking at this sudden shift from, not shift, but sudden highlighting of this dualistic way of looking at reality, quiddity, and existence from that point of view. So I'm not trying to prove that he was certainly influenced, or this is the only inevitable way that the direction of historical, like Islamic philosophy has evolved, but that this is one way of looking at the development of the philosophical narrative, particularly in the Persianate context, because we know that when Islamic philosophy goes to the West, for example, with Averroes and all, I mean, this is not much of a thing anymore, this wujud thing, and this, and all the and later the glorification of wujud, and this tension. And part of my project is to sort of juxtapose this development with also the kind of development and debates among Zoroastrian metaphysicians over what is meant by light and darkness. Is there only one reality, or are there two realities? Because this had its development of its own and the debates of its own. So a sort of juxtaposition of two seemingly different discourses, mythological and philosophical, and how they might have influenced, I mean, like how the mythological could have enriched or influenced the second. But as I said, I'm in a very early phase of this project.
That sounds good. And so you don't want to name your top 3 philosophers?
No.
Mohsen,
I think every Iranian is a philosopher.
Well,
they just have to do it more consciously and more methodologically.
You know, if you go back to Iqbal's development of metaphysics in Persia, you know, he famously said that the Persian mind is very open to metaphysics. Yeah. The Aryan mind is like that. And of course,
forget about Aryan.
And he said, of course, the Semitic mind is not.
Yeah.
So it was being kind of a
wow. I don't want to take it that way.
No, I think that's not terribly helpful, but yeah, but it's certainly something which does come up in that work, is this idea that there is a continuity of metaphysical speculation in sort of the Persian context, yes. Which of course has its own problems on that as well. Okay, are there any final, so Mohsen, you don't want to chip in on this, your top 3 philosophers, do you?
Oh, please don't mean that situation. Don't put me in that situation.
As I said, you know, I'm perfectly happy to pronounce the heresy of saying that Bidayat al-Hikmah is a pretty useless text. But and also it's actually one of the few texts which has been translated, but I would challenge anyone to make sense of the translation.
Yeah. The Elements of Philosophy, that's yeah. The title, yeah.
But anyway, I mean, I think certainly some of us should, you know, maybe what we should be doing is collaborating more on doing things. So, you know, we do have increasingly Iranian colleagues who are producing work in English, which is very good, like the article I mentioned by Musavian. But yes, maybe we should be doing kind of joint works, which would be one way of doing it. And certainly coming up with new pedagogical methods. I'm trying to set up a series of translations of texts, which hopefully will do that, both pre-modern and modern. And so, you know, life is, what's the famous saying, life is short, but the art is long, or something like that?
Yeah, Virginia Woolf.
But anyway, there is still much for us to do. I think at this point, really, I should just thank Sayeh for her time. I'm very appreciative. I think this has been a wonderful conversation, which I feel like, you know, almost sad that we have to bring it to an end. It's been almost an hour and a half. I think it's been a really good start. We have another 5 of these coming up. So I will recirculate the the link for the talk on the conversation on Monday, and we'll be having another 5 at least conversations. So please do kind of watch out for that. And yes, thank you to Mohsen in Tehran, and thank you very much to Sayeh as well.
Thank you for having me, and
Thank you.
Khuda